Okay, so just to figure out some way to splice that previous video I did with this one, because it's the same topic. And I had to go in the shop and it threw me off. I had more to say. I think it's going to start raining, so I'm putting my hood up. Yeah, basically, the reason these type of stimulants are so, and drugs in general, I suppose, are so addictive is because they're hijacking the circuits in our brain that are there for an evolutionary biological survival reason. So we have dopamine, circuits in our brain, reward circuits. Dopamine's the reward chemical, and it's about us. We're supposed to get it from things like eating, right? Completing tasks successfully. So in a prehistoric time, that would have been like successfully hunting an animal to kill, or successfully completing successfully finishing shelter for the night, stuff like that. Those things are supposed to give us dopamine. So the reward circuit makes us keep doing them for our survival. And then obviously sex releases like way more than that, because we're supposed to be, because it continues the human race, right? Reproduction. So the reward circuit's there, for our survival and to continue as a species. Okay? Now, the problem is, in a modern day, there are many different things which hijack that dopamine circuit, that reward circuit. And like the most obvious example would be something like crystal meth or crack. So crack cocaine releases dopamine way more than sex. So in terms of a raw chemical experience, in terms of the raw pleasure of that experience, I'm not talking about how memorable it is or how meaningful you find it or whatever. The raw pleasure of that experience, of that crack high, of a good fucking boomer of crack cocaine, that raw experience is going to be way better than sober sex in terms of the amount of pleasure chemicals it releases. And so this is why people choose it over food, over housing, over relationships, sex, everything, because it's hijacked the reward circuit that's innately there in us as a tool of survival. So in a sense, you could say the brain starts treating the drug as its kind of survival, right? As it's the highest priority thing for it, right? Because it's hijacked the circuit that's there to keep you alive and make you eat to stay alive and have sex and stuff. It's hijacked that circuit, so your brain primitively places the substance as the highest priority, right? And crystal meth apparently even releases even more dopamine than that. When something's so pleasurable and releases so much dopamine, you're fighting your primitive brain to not want to take it. And so we as humans, we have like our lizard brain, which makes us chase dopaminergic activity, food, sex, stuff like that, hedonism. Crystal meth, that lizard part of the brain is going to want that, pure raw pleasure, high amount of dopamine. So, but we have to override that with like the higher, more advanced parts of our brain that deal with logic, reasoning, morality, ethics, making decisions that don't affect us in the long term. But it's very hard to do that because the primitive drive, the primitive reward circuit drive is so strong that it can be impossible for some people to ever override it. Like you're literally fighting a craving that like your brain is treating this drug as the most important thing for it, as the height of possible pleasure that it can receive, and because it's way beyond anything natural. Like we're obviously wired to want sex and stuff because that gives us dopamine and we find that really pleasurable. We're wired to want fatty, sugary, salty foods, which I'll expand on in a minute. You know, we're wired to want that. So you're fighting your natural craving that we're kind of course we're going to have for something that gives us a crazy amount of dopamine when we have it, when we smoke it. You know? It's way beyond any kind of natural experience you could have. It's a total hijacking. It's almost like a glitch in the Matrix. That's what it's like. It's like an error. It's like something that feels so good shouldn't exist because it's like tricking your brain almost. It's like, this is kind of why I say it, it's like Satan. You know, crystal meth is like Satan. It pulls you in because it's so fucking pleasurable, and it's literally hijacking your biology. It's hijacking your neurology, right? With insane dopamine levels. And then it's completely ruining you and sending you to the depths of hell. You know, when you've been up for 7 days and you're in psychosis and shit. You know, it's absolutely awful. And what I wanted to say about when I mentioned sugary and salty, fatty food, we're wired to go after those things because in a prehistoric time, when every day was about survival, when every day was about survival, you know, fatty, sugary, salty, high-calorie foods would have been rare. And so, of course, we're wired to want them because it would have been an important source of energy in those times, right? Like if you find nuts or berries or high-fat meat, it would have been important that we ate those things, hence why we're wired to do it, because we wouldn't have had the abundance of food we have now. And with this abundance of food, again, you're fighting biology. Like the concept to a prehistoric man of controlled dieting and portions and avoiding X food would have been totally alien to them because it was about survival. And their reward circuits in their brain, their wiring is perfectly suited for their environment, because an environment where with sparse food, where the reward circuit is there for them to chase the thing that's actually important for them and isn't readily available, the wiring is perfectly suited for that environment. Whereas in our modern day and age, our wiring isn't suited for our environment. Our wiring where we chase dopamine means that we have an abundant, and we live in a society where there's an abundance of McDonald's and KFC, fast food, sugary cakes, all this shit, means we're having to fight our evolutionary biological wiring to not eat those foods, and that's totally unnatural to us. And I think so many things in our society are putting undue, unfair pressure on us because we're wired to fucking want those things. So you're asking people to fight against their natural instincts and biology. Almost. Their primitive brain is going to crave McDonald's and KFC because the brain sees, high-fat food source, that's important. Gives you loads of dopamine when you eat it. Same thing with pornography. Like, we're obviously wired to chase, sexual stuff. But then you have porn, which again hijacks the dopamine. This is probably a common problem for many men. You have porn, which hijacks the dopamine circuit. And it's the exact same thing, where they're all wired to be really drawn to this content, and then it completely twists their view on sex and stuff. And then obviously the worst examples are like I said before, crystal meth, crack cocaine. Like these things you always see online, like it's a bit cringeworthy to be honest. You always see online when you get these kind of alpha male sigma pages talking about, stop your addictions and all this shit. And all they ever speak, because the people who are viewing that content are like normal kind of young men who they might not be completely happy with where they're at, and they might have some bad habits that they want to stop and become more successful and stuff. That's the audience, but they're not necessarily dealing with proper problems like proper like doing class A drugs or actual real chemical dependence. So like when you see on these like some thread on Twitter, some like alpha male thing with he's got a picture of like a Greek statue as his you know, or fucking the guy from Peaky Blinders, and the thread is, the post is talking about, you know, how to stop any addiction, and the advice obviously works for addictions which are mentioned in these things, like at most cannabis, alcohol, minor alcohol addiction. Actually, I mean, severe alcohol addiction is in the same fucking category as heroin, you know, if not worse. But yeah, it's doing things like porn, and you know, oh look, you know, the dopamine, you're addicted to scrolling reels, and it's like, yeah, these things do hijack the dopamine circuit, but not in a serious way as compared to crystal meth, something like that. And it's just, I think what they should say is how to stop bad habits. I think the term addiction is being thrown around there a little bit loosely, and it's, like I said, it's for kind of young men who maybe aren't particularly fully satisfied with where they're at, but they're not dealing with any really strong demons where that kind of milquetoast willpower advice doesn't work. They need a genuine drastic change. If you're dealing with something like crack or crystal meth, you need a genuine drastic change, or like a spiritual rebirth or something, you know. There's something else I was going to say. I don't know if it's flashing me. What was I saying? So I was talking about hijacking of evolutionary reward circuits. Yes, that was it, right. So there's a guy called Robert Sapolsky, and he's a Stanford professor in like neuroscience and biology and stuff. Extremely fucking bright guy. He's got a really interesting video about free will, actually, which everyone should. He's done a few videos about free will. Very, very fucking interesting shit. Everyone should watch that. It's absolutely fascinating. Whether or not you fully agree with it, he makes a really good case, and it's fucking so interesting. Robert Sapolsky was talking about, and this is where I'm making the connection. So in the way that I talk about our evolutionary systems being unsuited for our current environment, more than we can handle, he talked about how our nervous systems, sympathetic nervous systems, stress systems in our body aren't suited for our modern environment. And again, it's very fucking fascinating stuff. I've actually wanted to buy the book, Why Zebras Don't Have Stomach Ulcers, and it basically talks about that. I've not obviously read it, I really want to get it though. But yeah, he talks about how the stress that we people feel over a 30-year mortgage was the example he used, or losing a job, or deadlines, etc., activates the same stress response, you know, in our nervous system that being chased by a lion would. And when you put it in those terms, it's frightening. Like, imagine if you said to someone, a 30-year mortgage is going to have you feeling like exactly the same way biologically as being chased by a lion permanently for 30 years. Like, our bodies aren't meant to withstand that level of stress arousal for that long. You know, so a 30-year mortgage is activating the same system that is there to stop us, to keep us alive in genuinely dangerous situations. Like, we aren't suited for this. You know, and chronic stress will eventually kill you, and we're not supposed to withstand that level of stress for that long. And that's why I say it's very similar to how, you know, that the dopamine system's been hijacked. You know, like, we're really not supposed to live. Our bodies and brains are the same as they were however many 100,000 years ago or whatever. But obviously the society's dramatically changed, but our bodies haven't caught up. And so we're living in a very fucking weird time. And it's always good to remember that. Like, I suppose it's good to remember what is really important. But the problem is, you know, whether or not you like it, these things do cause stress. 30-year mortgage, job and shit, activating the same fucking system that's there so that your goal for the day is to make sure you get shelter, food, stay alive, and then avoid being eaten by a lion, or avoid getting bored by a mammoth's tusk, right? We're not meant for this. And I think many people, many adults, will live in chronically stressful situation, will live in a chronically stressful situation for years and years and years with no real reprieve. And like obviously, like I said before, they're adding alcohol on top of that. You know? We aren't meant for this. And I think, honestly, in some way, we would have been happier in prehistoric times. Look, that's a really bold thing to say, because when every day is about survival, that's a struggle. That is obviously a very severe struggle. But having lived in times of my life where every day was about survival, like being on the street and stuff, you don't have any of these anxieties that are kind of like, if you think about the hierarchy of needs, if your concerns are mostly about the bottom two layers of that pyramid, the bottom two layers of that hierarchy, you can feel weirdly better about a lot of things. Like you're not worrying about social status, losing a job. I mean, you're worrying about money as far as a tool for survival, but not in the same way that we're doing it now with mortgages and savings and shit like that. It's almost like we're more suited for that survival. I'm not saying living on the street is the actual best way, because it's far and away not what we're supposed to do. And you are dealing with chronic stress all the time, whereas I don't think in prehistoric times it would have actually always been like that. Obviously, the stakes were higher in many ways in the prehistoric time, because it's genuine survival, and if you don't eat, you're fucked, shit like that. But I think a lot of the problems that we're dealing with now in society are way more complex in a way that we're not designed for, right? So, kind of say what I wanted to say.